Well, there's been a consistent question I've been receiving in my inbox as of late, and it goes a little something like this. Colton, I just bought this car with this exact paint on it. I need to know what is the best compound, polish, and pad pairing for each of those to make my car absolutely perfect. And I kind of chuckle every single time I get one of those because I think a lot of people don't really understand a lot of the nuance and experience that goes into paint correction and polishing and the wide array of different variables that goes into actually doing so. So today what I'm hoping to do is steer you guys down a good path of products that I pick up pretty much 90% of the time, whether that's a compound, a polish, a pad pairing for both, and really dive into some of the more nuanced aspects to paint correction and polishing, some tips and tricks along the way, as well as some product recommendations that will hopefully work for your vehicle. Welcome back to the channel. Let's jump into it. Well guys, thank you all for being here today, and hopefully this will be an insightful video for you guys and answer a lot of those questions I've been receiving in the inbox, because like I said, you know, these questions, I understand where people are coming from. They want a good recommendation, but I can also not tell you that these products I'm going to recommend today are going to perfectly work with the finish of your vehicle. In fact, here at the shop, I have probably 20 to 30 different compounds, 20 to 30 different polishes, and many different pads. But these are going to be things that I have seen over my 10,000+ hours of doing paint corrections and polishing, products that I grab almost every single time. Now, we'll get into some of the nuance here, but I want to start off here going through our compounds, polishes, and pad pairings. And understand with this, you are working with such a wide array of variables. You just look at paint in general. You have hard paint, you have soft paint. You also have a brand new car versus a car that's had contamination, lub marks on it. You might have a new car that the paint comes in and it actually looks pretty darn good. You might also get a brand new car where it's had a ton of work done at the factory. It might have sanding marks, rotary marks all over it. It might show up to the dealership and the kid that gets paid $7 an hour and uses the same chamois to dry every single car on the lot just scratches the hell out of your car. Those are all the little variables, let alone how you're actually doing it. What's your arm speed? What's the speed of the actual machine? How much pressure are you using? How clean are you working? All those factors play into getting perfect paint at the end of the day. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of focus, a lot of frustration, a lot of trial and error to actually figure it out. But hopefully this will help you guys. So starting over here with my #1 compound recommendation. Now this is a very heavy cut compound, but this is something I'll choose 90% of the time, and that is CarPro Ultra Cut. So this has really good cutting ability, as well as finishes down pretty darn nice. Even with working with super soft paint, working with piano black, if you have some deep heavy defects in that, that's where I'm going to pick up something like this. Now a lot of folks especially might think on soft paint, okay, you might not want to go super aggressive because it's going to be really challenging to actually finish out. I would argue actually using a heavier cut compound, rapidly removing those defects and then stopping is a better way to go than using a more medium cut compound and, you know, going over, you know, 4, 5, 6, 7 passes on a single area on a panel when you can just quickly remove them. Reason behind that is, when we're actually doing our paint corrections, anytime we're using a DA, a forced rotation, or a rotary, we are naturally adding in heat to the surface. Paint expands and contracts with heat and also being cold. And when you are heating the panel up, you're actually swelling it. And a lot of the times what'll happen, if you're swelling that panel, you go over it, it actually looks fine. Once it cools down, you'll see all those defects kind of come back. Some more nuanced perspective, and especially talking about reappearing water spots, bug staining, etching, stuff like that. Maybe I'll do a fully separate video on that and how to work around all that, because it's very complicated. But typically when I'm using this, it's, you know, getting defects out very rapidly, very quickly, and then I'll deal with polishing out the DA haze that's left over. Now for my pad pairing for this, I am a microfiber cutting pad guy. Now, some folks out there like using foam cutting pads. I absolutely hate them. #1, typically foam cutting pads are really rigid and very hard, and makes it almost impossible to get in very concave areas. You're working on something like a 911 with a ton of curves and all of that stuff. It is basically impossible. You're having to do like, you know, a pass that the pad is only touching like an inch at a time. It's a pain in the butt. So having something that's got a little bit more moldability to it, something that's thin as well, that you can definitely, if you need to, get some more pressure on it, but it's still going to have that pad rotation, is good to go with. The issue with these pads, they're now discontinued. So Meguiar's has actually replaced these with their universal microfiber cutting pads. And I got to say, these are pros and cons over the old one. I do like these because I feel like they stay a little bit cleaner. They release the compound in the slurry, which we're going to talk a little bit more about here in a minute, a little bit better, and they do work a little bit cooler. The negatives with these, on certain vehicles, I've noticed they don't cut as well as the older pads, but there's also times where these cut better than the older pads. So it's just, again, we're getting into the small minutia of paint correction here, but this is typically my compound and pad pairing here. Now, I know for a lot of you, the compounding stage might not be the most complicated because, you know, you're just trying to remove the defects, and it's really when you start getting into removing the haze that actually came from that DA or first rotation or rotary, you're having trouble finishing out. And a lot of the times, I think that's down to, number one, the polish you're using as well as the pads you're using. So what I can tell you, I use 98, 99% of the time, Coach Chemi Microcut. I personally don't think there is a better polish that works on more surfaces and finishes out better than Coach Chemi Microcut. This stuff is an absolute weapon. Number one, this has no silicones, no fillers in it, and it's not super oily. That is something you will see out of a lot of polishes out there. Some may even claim they don't have fillers. Some of the ones, I'll just say, a lot of influencers use this one specific one that it's kind of, if you know, you know. I'm not even going to mention it at this point. I'm just going to tell you Coach Chemi Microcut is the one you want to go with. If you use a polish with fillers, what's going to happen, especially if you're adding in long-term protection after the fact, is number one, if you do a panel prep wipe after the fact, you're going to notice you might have polished that panel, wiped it off, looked at it, and you're like, ah, it's absolutely perfect. Then you take an IPA wipe down, wipe it back down, and all that DA haze actually comes back. The same thing also happens with super, super oily polishes, is that they will very much mask all of that haze on there. You do an IPA wipe down and you can see all the haze back there. The other issue is having fillers and having a lot of that oily residue is a lot of the time, some of the panel preps we might be using, if you're somebody who uses just isopropyl alcohol, you may not actually remove that all the way, and then you put a coating on top of it. The coating doesn't actually bond, and it becomes this whole fiasco. So Coach Chemi Microcut, my absolute go-to. Now, again, I think the issue people have, especially working on super soft paint, we're talking about, you know, non-metallic jet black paint, is where a lot of people have a lot of issues. You would assume you want the finest polish there, but also the finest pad, something like the Rupes white foam over here. And I will tell you, if you're seeing people using these, they have no idea what they're doing with polishing, because these finish out worse than the Rupes yellow here. And what you should understand about these is that they are far too soft and they end up folding over themselves and actually causing more marring than the stronger, quote unquote, Rupes yellow here. Now, what you want is something not only in your polish, but your actual pad here, more so in your polish, that you're going to have something that's going to have enough cutting ability to remove that DA haze, and then have enough finishing ability that it's going to be absolutely perfect, not leave anything behind there. But you also need a pad that has some rigidity, some cutting power to it, and not just an oily residue. And by the time you do an IPA wipe down, it's all marred up. So that, like I said, is 90% of the time what I use for my cutting pads, my polishing pads. What happens if you get into the case of you have paint that is just not playing well with either one of those or the pads or whatever? Well, that's where experience comes in. Now, the experience, of course, is the hardest thing to actually teach, and something that I cannot necessarily portray on YouTube. I can give you key indicators on what I do, but there is a lot of things that I do just almost instinctually, and changing this, changing that, and that can be a wide variety of things. That could be changing the compound, changing the polish, changing the pad, changing the amount of it. Maybe you're using too much polish. Maybe you're using too little of it. Maybe you are overworking it. Maybe you're under underworking it. Like, you know, when we're working with a compound here, we want to ensure that yes, we're getting our cutting done, but that we're not leaving a surface that is impossible to polish out, or, you know, you're having to do a full another step of like a medium cut polish / compound and then go to a finishing one. If you're working with really tricky paint, that could just be the case of you're underworking it, you're overworking it, you have your machine going too high, too low, you're moving too quickly. There is a million things that goes on into this, and knowing where to go from there is not something you can teach. So what I always recommend people do is, like I said, the products that I recommend here are my core main ones that I use, and the other 20, 30, 40 different products I have are for those cars that just throw a wrench in my gears and I'm like, all right, I got to start changing up a multitude of different factors, and that takes time. The best thing you can do is do test spots. And I see a lot of people do this and they get scared of doing test spots because, you know, they're not experienced with it. And, you know, you'll see manufacturers go, do it in an inconspicuous area. I do it exactly the opposite. I do it smack dab on the center of the hood so I can see what I'm actually doing. I want to know what the panel is doing. While I'm actually doing that, I'm watching how that compound, that polish is reacting, how quickly it is dissipating all of those cutting abrasives or diminishing abrasives in there. And that is the hard part of trying to explain this over YouTube. So I do think there are great core products, and if you're looking for a single line, personally, I really think the Kosh Chemie line of products for cutting and polishing your vehicle is one of the best and most complete. Their heavy cut compound is absolutely incredible. I personally prefer Ultra Cut a little bit more, but there's times where this has absolutely saved my butt, where Ultra Cut's maybe a little bit too much. It's not working with the paint quite as well. I change all those different aspects we just talked about, and I have to actually change the compound. This is the one I want to go to. On the flip side, you might need something that's somewhere in the middle. Let's say you get a super soft non-metallic black vehicle. It's got some decent marring in it, but nothing that's like crazy. So you might actually need to go less. You might want something like Kosh Chemie Fine Cut here that has good cutting ability, but even better finishing ability than something like these two over here, so that when you go to polish, you're not dealing with so much DA haze. That's the thing that takes forever to learn and understand, and changing each and every one of those variables changes your end results. I would say one of the biggest things though that I see people struggle with is actually working clean and understanding residue control. And this is a big topic from, you know, Kevin Brown, Larry Costello. Kevin, really the godfather of polishing, and I very much believe in the way he polishes, and what I'll do is kind of show you what that actually means. So understanding when we're doing compounding and polishing, we are actually removing paint off the surface. Now on hard clear coat or hard paint in general, naturally we're having to use typically more compound, more heat, more pressure to actually get defects removed. On soft, it's completely the opposite, because you are dealing with so much paint coming off quickly. That's where people really struggle with finishing ability. And this paints a perfect picture here. So these are those universal microfiber cutting pads, and you can see they are red. This is an ultra red Tesla Model Y Performance behind me. Now you might be thinking, Colton burned through the clear coat on it and he's getting into the actual paint. This has a tinted clear coat, but it also paints a perfect picture. After I've done the correction on this, all of that residue you're actually dealing with. Now, working clean means having a clean surface of the vehicle. So washing it, decontaminating it. There's times as well, this more nuance that we can do a whole video on, whether you should clay before, not clay before. I go in between sometimes, especially on new cars. I don't typically clay them, especially if the paint looks pretty good. I don't want to mar it up. Those iron particulates will get removed during compounding stage, but sometimes they actually fight you. Again, we're getting into nuance here, but the reality is working clean is one of the biggest aspects to getting that paint looking as good as possible, and controlling this residue is super important. So you will see people use something like this. This is, you know, a pad cleaner, and a lot of the times after you're done with the pass, especially on microfiber, they will be, you know, forced down with, you know, that compound and all the residue coming off the surface, i.e. your paint, and it just doesn't have the ability to cut. So you need to, you know, go over the actual microfiber, get them standing back up. Same goes for wool as well. The only problem is you're not getting rid of it. Now, what I actually use here instead of a pad washer, I'm not a pad washer because then that adds another variable of moisture in that. It doesn't work that well with some certain compounds, some certain polishes. It just becomes a headache. What I personally like using is compressed air and call it the blowout method. Again, this is the Kevin Brown method of controlling that residue. So after I've done my passes, and while I'm doing that, I'm looking, like I said, at how the panel is reacting, how that compound, how that polish is reacting. I'm looking through that actual residue on the surface to see if we're getting the removal of defects that we want, whether that's scratches, whether that's sanding marks, whether that's DA haze. And then I'm, trying to figure out, okay, at that point, is that compound worked in enough? Is that polish, overworked? You'll see a lot of things in between there. But after it comes off, I'll blow the pad out to get that residue out. Now it makes an absolute mess of the shop, of the car. So every single time a car comes in here for paint correction and polish, they get washed twice. They get washed when they come in. I do my compound on it. There's dust everywhere. I rewash the car, then get into polishing, do my panel prep, and then coat the car. So it's understanding that working clean is one of the biggest aspects there. You might just have so much residue coming off. You could even, be using Koch Chemie Microcut, doing everything right, having the correct arm speed, the correct pressure, the correct amount of product, working it the appropriate amount, but that final remaining factor of working clean might not be getting you the results you want. So I do hope this video is helpful. I also understand it's probably going to confuse a lot of people, but this is the reality of doing paint corrections at a very high level. And again, you can go to AutoZone, you can go to Harbor Freight, you can order on Amazon a pad, a polisher, and a all-in-one product, and you're going to get okay results. But that's not what I do here at the shop. I am trying to get that next level, and I think a lot of you watching this channel are trying to do so as well. So understand there's a lot of nuance and just a ton of experience that goes into doing paint corrections and polishing at a very high level. And really it comes down to working around very soft paint and controlling that residue like Kevin Brown came up with, and his overarching theme with that, I very much believe in. So I will leave these in the link in the description below if you guys want to pick them up. Happy polishing, always happy to answer questions. Some of these that you guys send me, it's just like a laundry list of things, and I just need to make a video. So hopefully it was insightful for you guys. Anyways, we'll see you in the next one soon. Bye-bye.